Friends, welcome and namaste. I am absolutely delighted to have Shri Raghavan Jagannathan of Swarajya Mag with us today. Jagannathan ji is the editorial director of Swarajya for, I believe, more than 5-6 years now. And before that, he was with Business Standard, Financial Express, Forbes, and of course, First Post. So I came across his reading when he was with the First Post, and he writes in such a lovely manner, in such a lucid manner. It's beautiful, and I'm really delighted, and it's my dream to interview Jagannathan ji sometime. Also, he writes and op-eds in Times of India once in a fortnight. Is that correct, sir?
Once a month, actually. Or whenever they ask me, I write.
Oh, okay. Okay. So welcome to Indic Vichar. And thank you so much for giving us time. It's a real
pleasure being with you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So as I told you, we are confining ourselves today to the economic agenda, more or less, and particularly to the farm laws which have been reversed by Prime Minister Modi and his, the government. So my first question is that I presume that you also agree that this is a dent for the BJP, for BJP's economic agenda, overall for BJP, for Modi's image. So if it is a dent, what do you think, how big a dent that is? In terms of electoral reverses and of course Modi's image. Sorry, yeah, please.
Yeah, it is certainly a setback, a serious setback, both to the economic agenda and the political salience of the Prime Minister and the BJP, because they invested a lot of political capital in the farm laws, and ultimately through street power and money power, the rich farmers managed to get the law reversed, especially because a lot of anti-national elements had also infiltrated the movement, even though they were not dominant, but they were very important part of it. I think Modi ji probably felt that if this continued endlessly, soon a farmer agitation would become essentially an anti-India agitation. So that is one reason why he was forced to retreat. And purely from a political point of view, I think it is better to retreat at this stage when you still have some credibility left than to do it later when there is no honor. The point is, you actually look at it, even the Supreme Court could not do anything about them. Okay, Supreme Court has all the power in the world. It does not have to seek elections or votes from anybody, but it did not have the courage of convictions to roll back. It had stopped the farm laws and it could not get the farmers to go back. So I think it's not only the government that had to retreat, even the Supreme Court had shown no spine in dealing with this. That is a reality. Yes, there is a damage to political credibility. Now we'll have to see how they are able to rebuild it again, but that's something we have to see.
So do you see any electoral damage because of this? Or actually it may, because the laws were reversed, it may gain? I mean, how do you see that?
No. There is no gain from it, but whether he has managed to cut his losses in the electoral side or not is what we need to see. We'll know that in March when UP and other elections are held, Punjab elections. My guess is there will be a marginal loss in UP. Definitely a significant loss in UP, but not necessarily a defeat, but a lot of seats where the BJP won easily last time in Western UP might actually go down. So that's one thing. Actually, now it is more dependent on Yogi ji to deliver UP than the national party.
Right. So, I mean, just in hindsight, do you think that with Corona, this could have been postponed?
Which the farm laws?
Yeah.
Look, it has to be done sooner or later. So in India, unfortunately, the straightforward approach like reforms don't work. Because vested interests immediately rise up to stop anything good that you might do. So it is best to approach, politically, I think India has always approached reforms through stealth rather than directness. So Modi ji was rare in trying to tackle it in a more direct way. and he has faced the consequences. So now I think all politicians will learn that you must do reforms quietly without announcing it. Do small rule changes here and there, bit by bit, bit by bit. Don't do anything big bang. And therefore, we are back to stealth-based reform.
Right. Okay. So, do you see this rollback of reforms as one-off failure, or do you feel that overall BJP has not done well on economic reforms?
No, I mean, yes and no. I think I don't think any government in recent memory has done consistent and regular reforms like Modi has done. Even when you compare to 1991, that time the country was bankrupt. So they had no option but to do it. IMF said, was dictating terms and saying, do this, do this, do this, and they signed on it. So then we got credit for the reforms when they got done. We didn't do it by conviction. We did it because we were bankrupt. For the first time, when a country that is non-bankrupt is trying to do reforms, and then many reforms are indeed good. I think the two mistakes that Modi made was in the first term, I think he went too aggressively against black money. So normally what happens is whenever you go aggressively against black money on all fronts, economy tends to decelerate a bit because a lot of money gets withdrawn from circulation. I'm not only talking about demonetization. Even say like if you have black money and you stop spending it because you're afraid that you'll get caught, then the impact of consumption demand reduces, right? The short-term impact of any direct attack on black money is always deflationary. So that was one thing. See, UPA understood that part of it. So they were never against corruption. They were continue, no problem, it's helping the economy. You know, when it comes to money, you know, the color of the money doesn't matter when it comes to economic performance. Because white money or black money, if it creates demand, it benefits growth, right? After all, black money is not money with a different color. It is merely money on which you are not paid taxes.
Correct.
Or you are hidden from the bill. So what really happens is he went too hard on that. I think that was his big mistake in the first half. Now he is correcting it. He is not allowing that. This time, actually, I think he took on the farm lobby, which is too powerful right now. I think the farm lobby actually will become weaker after another 5 or 10 years. But I think he took them at the last point when they're still strong. So tactically, it was the wrong thing to do. But you can't say you live and learn. Hopefully, you can do the same reforms indirectly.
Correct.
And in bits and pieces. That's how we'll have to do it. In India, everything is incremental. Nothing radical ever gets done. Absolutely. Because there is too diverse for us to take one idea and go with it.
So Jagannathan, you mentioned black money lobby and rich farmer. Don't you think they overlap somewhere? I mean, there are some common factors between them.
Of course, because the rich farm lobby is a lobby that not only does not pay taxes, but is heavily subsidized by those who pay taxes. I mean, in the farm sector is the only sector in the country where every single thing is subsidized. Power, diesel, fertilizer, food, credit, everything is subsidized. And in spite of and these do not benefit the small and marginal farmers who are 85% of the country. It benefits 15% who have more than 2 hectares of land. It is that lobby which you decided to take on, and they have come out trumps, because when you do reforms, a vocal minority always trumps a silent majority. So that's the problem. Whether in the cultural sphere, a vocal minority, as we have seen, will always rule over a silent majority. This is what has happened in the farm case also.
Correct. So, earlier land bill in 2015 and now farm laws. So do you think that farmers somehow, BJP has been they may have got some farm votes, they have been voted by farmers, but really BJP has not been able to get into farmers and change their way of thinking. Is that a failure? Do you see like that?
See, yes and no. The problem is the more you try to keep farming viable by subsidization, the less farmers will actually benefit. See, no country can survive with 45% in agriculture, right? You ultimately have to have an agriculture that is less than 15%, because agriculture share of GDP is 15%. So 15% earnings are supporting 45% of the population. Correct. Now, this is unviable by any stretch of imagination. And you have a taxpayer base of 5% of the population. So 5% is subsidizing 45%. So how is it viable? If 45% is subsidizing 5%, it is possible. Like in US or Japan, where farmers are small lot, and in order to preserve farming, you can pay high prices and keep them happy. But 45% cannot be subsidized by 5% at any cost. So this is fundamentally unviable. The only logical way is to reduce the number of farms, more enable consolidation, and give jobs to farmers who are displaced from farming. This is the only logical way out. And of course, you've got to consolidate land. Because 2 acres and a half, 1.5 acres and all is not going to help any farmer invest. You don't need an investment subsidy if you have a large farm, because automatically you can borrow and invest and raise productivity. But if you have 1.5 acres, how much can you borrow to invest in that land? And even if you buy a tractor, it will not be good enough for 1.5 acres. You'll have to relate it out. So it doesn't work like that. So the economics of farming is completely going wrong. And the fact that the rich farmers are won will actually come to bite the farmers in the butt again. They are the ones who are going to ultimately lose.
Correct. Right. So I mean, just a small question on taxes. You said 5%, only 5% people pay taxes. So sometimes I also think, but I mean, don't you think that most of the population pays indirect taxes?
Yeah.
So isn't it a bit unfair to say that 5% are subsidizing rest of the?
No, actually, it's not. It is correct for the simple reason that the people who pay direct taxes are subsidizing those who do not pay any tax at all on their income. That is rich farmers. That is, these 5% are subsidizing the 15% of rich farmers. But when it comes to indirect taxes, what really happens is we all paid indirect taxes only on a portion of our purchases. That is, like say the vast majority of goods are actually exempt from indirect taxes. I mean, like food and low-cost footwear or things, they pay very little taxes. So the bulk of the taxes, even in indirect taxes, are paid on the relatively higher costing things, which are not paid by the poor actually. So I mean, things like rice, wheat, tea, and all that. Who is paying taxes? You're not paying any tax.
Okay, so I mean, you mentioned the reforms by stealth. So my question is that it was P.V. Narasimha Rao who was father of reforms without any doubt, and it was mainly then carried forward by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, 98 onwards till 2004, and to some extent till 2009 also. I mean, let us say that Manmohan Singh was able to carry those reforms till 2009. But talking about 92 to 2002, this 10 years, 2004, these 12 years of Vajpayee and Narasimha Rao. So against that, how does this government stack up? I mean, which government would you rate number 1, number 2, and number 3?
No, this government is clearly the most reformist of the lot, because the kind of reforms they have done. See, they've done subsidy reforms to DBT, Aadhaar, they've done bankruptcy reform, they've done indirect taxes through GST. I think this level of reform has not been done by any government outside a crisis. You know, Vajpayee started reform, like say privatization, Electricity Act, and other things. But he unfortunately lost. If Vajpayee would have probably have been the most reformist if he had won 2004, then this country would not have lost 1 decade in Manmohanomics. Manmohan actually was reformist only in 91 and 92. After that, he reversed course totally. This is the Modi government is the only one that has consistently been doing in 1 reform every year. I mean, it is not, you're not seen that in a very, very long time. So that is why it is doubly tragic that he had to roll back on land reforms and factor, because the last major reforms left are in factor markets. That is land, labor, and this thing. Because management exit is now possible through the insolvency code. You know, but labor flexibility is still not there fully.
Yeah, even I guess that is pending. That is pending, right?
Yeah, that is pending. I mean, it is there through the labor codes that have been eased. But we don't know after the farm law whether they will impose now the labor codes, and because now you will have unions also shouting on the streets, you'll have a problem.
Correct. Right, I understand. So I again, one slightly divergent thought which I have, it is that as you said that DBTs and GST and IBC is something which this government done, and it should be given credit for that. Sir, what I always think is that if you look at these reforms, say GST and IBC and demonetization together, I always thought that those were the reforms on tax collection side. After that, I mean, through DBT, the subsidies were distributed to poor more efficiently, and through GST and through demonetization, it became easy for government to collect taxes, right? So on the one hand, it is the poor who are benefiting. On the other hand, it is government is benefiting. But what about the middle class? I mean, that's slightly rhetorical, and I mean, BJP loyalists should not be asking that question. But then there is no other better person than you to ask that question. Hence.
Yeah, what is happening right now is a rebalancing of the middle class. But is the middle class also is not one single mass. You know, correct. What is happening is Modi's help of the poor is creating a new lower level middle class, which is people who are earning, say, less than 20,000 a month. You know, correct. We look at middle class in our terms, in terms of middle and upper middle class. You know?
I understand.
So this focus is not, which is a very small percentage of the population, whereas the new middle class runs into millions. So here you're like your maid servants, your street hawkers, these are all middle class. They are just coming out of poverty and into the lower middle class. I think his focus has been on that, but this is the broad end of the voter base, and it is also the broad end of the middle class. So it's like middle class also is the pyramid. It's like within the middle class, there is upper middle and lower middle. Similarly, so his focus has been on raising the lower middle to a level of status where I think they can be a significant voting chunk, and they can then pull other people up, you know. So that's precisely what is happening under this government.
Wonderful. So last question, Jaggi. And I mean, how do you see way forward for reforms? What would be, I mean, we just said, you said labor laws. So again, those are pending. So do you see those labor laws coming up in this, with the session we started today, parliament session?
See, actually, the fundamental change you need is more in the political side. The problem really is that all these laws, agriculture, labor, everything is actually in this concurrent list or state list. States are not doing any damn thing, and you expect Modi to do everything. It is not working. So states are just happily giving the blame to him and not doing anything themselves. You want your state to grow. Each state is bigger than most countries in Europe. Okay, at least the bigger states, you know. UP is the 5th or 6th largest country in the world if it was a separate country, you know. So the point is you need the states to move up. I see some states doing some change, but basically as long as you keep driving change from the center and not forcing the states to think, the states have to step up to the act. My own view is that the states must be brought into the farm talks, because agriculture is 100% a state subject. Demanding MSP from the center and then claiming agriculture is a state subject is the most contradictory way of putting it.
Yeah,
if you
hypocrisy that is.
Yeah, if Punjab wants MSP guaranteed, you guarantee them. No, nobody is stopping you. Why don't you do that? Why do you expect Modi to pay for your guarantees? So the problem really is you need to bring states in, especially in state list ideas, especially labor and this thing. Once they start doing it, as long as the focus is on the center, it's easy for the states to get away by saying that, oh, he is doing the wrong things. We are all in favor of democracy, liberalism, labor, agriculture, everything we are in favor. No? So they can pretend that they are the good guys and Modi is the bad guy. Now you need to invert this pyramid and say, you guys do it. This is a state list. I'm giving you all the MSP money. I'm transferring to states. Now you do the MSP now. You know, so once you do that, the states will suddenly find that they can't run away anywhere. So they have to be given more responsibility, and that can be done easily because they will be happy to take, say, 80% of the food subsidy and keep it their own and then run their farmers on their own. They can do it. So this is what you need to do. You need to challenge the states now. We keep challenging the center to do everything, whereas we now need to challenge the states.
So, I mean, just a small rejoinder to that, which is that should one of the states be allowed to run into the ground, and so that then it will open eyes of other people, say. You mentioned Punjab, so I don't see, I mean, Punjab is a sinking state from whatever I could read and understand.
Yeah. No, exactly, because they have the farmers have completely ruined the land by excess use of fertilizer. Correct. They need badly to shift to non-water absorbing crops. They need to move to horticulture and cash crop or whatever else it has to do, but they cannot do rice and wheat farming. No, that is where I think they have to shift. But this cannot happen if you keep raising MSP, because the same fellows will be producing the same things. Correct. It's like, so you have to, what you can do, you should subsidize them to keep their land fallow for 1 or 2 years and then shift to other forms of crops. So I think allowing a state to sink is not a good political option, because then it will actually boost militancy. It will actually create a social crisis. So what we need to do is encourage them to do the right path. I mean, we saw that happen. I mean, that way, typically, all these states of the Northeast are bankrupt. But if you allow them to sink without central transfers, they will then become hotbeds of militancy. So it's not a good idea. So especially Punjab, because they form a significant part of our, armed forces, and also they have a large Khalistani element who can immediately sort of gather steam if you let them. What you need to do is give them the incentive to shift to the right things.
Correct. Perfect, sir. Thank you so much. And it has been a real enlightening session, and would like to connect with you sometime again when some important things come.
Sure.
Namaskar and Dhanyavad.
Namaskar.